Is in New York. This is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. While the whole world watches, it apparently now has come down to this. Muammar Gaddafi is holding on to control of his stronghold of Tripoli, but he's lost control of large parts of his country, mostly in the east, with fresh fighting breaking out around the clock and around Tripoli. Tonight, there's reason to believe he's highly rattled by the fighting, the uprising. He gave a speech today that was hard to follow and make sense of, even by his standards. And as he spoke, more of his territory was changing hands. We begin tonight again inside Libya with our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who's in the city of Benghazi tonight. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Brian, from Benghazi. This is the unofficial capital of the rebel movement. Lawyers and judges are administering this city. There's even now a radio station here called Free Libya, and the rebels say Tripoli is next.
The fighting is closing in on Tripoli. Rebels and ruthless mercenaries hired by Gaddafi are battling for control of villages less than 100 miles from the capital.
The streets were being blocked off by sandbags, by blocks, by bricks, by anything that people could use to try to prevent any pro-regime forces from entering into the streets.
In the town of Zawiya today, 40 miles west of Tripoli, at least 10 people were reportedly killed in fighting. But some of the worst violence has been here in Benghazi, where hospitals are filled with wounded.
I can't manage how many did. Exactly, yes, more than 300. More than 300. The Benghazi, and injured patient more than 3,000.
Doctors say the victims were shot with bullets and anti-aircraft rounds. Many were executed at close range. But today, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi downplayed the violence and offered a radically different explanation in a bizarre and revealing radio address. We were in a car as he spoke. His words were slurred. He mumbled with long pauses. I've listened to speeches in Arabic of Middle East leaders for 15 years. This did not sound like a sane person.
Gaddafi is speaking now on state radio. It's very difficult to follow. He's all over the place. He's already mentioned the Kurds in northern Iraq, the Unabomber, India, and says the people carrying out this revolt are taking drugs that make them insane.
In the address, Gaddafi claimed al-Qaeda is behind the revolt. Osama bin Laden is slipping Libyans hallucinogenic pills in coffee with milk, and that the pills are distributed in mosques with help from the United States. A U.S. official today described Gaddafi as, quote, nuts. His family members also seem wildly out of touch. Gaddafi's son Saif appeared on television to claim Tripoli is safe and secure. But rebels say Gaddafi is holding Libya hostage. U.S. officials say the dictator is armed with chemical weapons and has a sovereign fund of $32 billion, more than enough to buy mercenaries and loyalists. Thousands of foreigners are still trying to escape the fighting and get away from Libya's apparently irrational leader.
It's just been constant shooting, so it's just time to leave.
A British warship today evacuated its nationals from the port here in Benghazi. But the airport in Tripoli remains crowded and chaotic, full of people desperate to leave, afraid of what Gaddafi might do.
Benghazi, Brian, is firmly under rebel control, and the rebels here tell us they believe they have enough force, enough momentum to push out Gaddafi in a matter of days. Brian?
All right, Richard Engel from Benghazi in Libya tonight. Richard, thanks. And you saw the people trying to leave. These are very tense times for more than 100 Americans stranded in Libya and for their families back home in the States who are finding it very tough to get real-time information about their loved ones. The plan tonight is to literally ferry many of the Americans, along with some other foreigners, from the Libyan capital of Tripoli to Malta, an island in the Mediterranean. The trip delayed by high seas and huge swells out on the water. Our Martin Fletcher is there tonight. Martin, good evening.
Hi, Brian. Well, yeah, that plan is not being very successful at the moment. There's 167 Americans on the boat, 118 nationals from other countries, and they're waiting for the weather to change. Now, conditions on the boat must be pretty bad. They've been waiting there on the boat now for about 40 hours. It's a 200-foot catamaran chartered by the American government. There are no beds on board, but we're told they are getting food and water. Nobody's been able to get through to anybody on the boat to actually ask the Americans how they're doing. But the family members have told NBC News that they're very frustrated with a lack of information from the State Department. Making the problem greater is that America has not been able to get permission to land charter planes at Tripoli airport to ferry people out by air. And other nations have had more success. The Turks have been able to ferry out 5,000 Turkish citizens from the port of Benghazi. The Greeks have been able to ferry out Chinese citizens, thousands of those. But they don't have the same weather conditions as in Tripoli. So now all the Americans on the ferry, on the boat waiting in Tripoli can do really is look at the weather, hope it gets better. And the ferry owners told us here in Malta that they're hoping to set sail tomorrow, Brian, weather, of course, permitting.
Well, we're hoping for some happy arrivals there in Malta. Martin Fletcher reporting live for us tonight. Martin, thanks. President Obama has publicly condemned the violence in Libya, but the problem for the U.S. and other countries continues to be the inability to shape events while watching these events unfold. Our chief foreign affairs correspondent, Andrea Mitchell, has more on this from our D.C. newsroom tonight. Andrea, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. The president talked to the leaders of France, Great Britain, and Italy today, trying to organize a united front against Gaddafi. Tomorrow, NATO will meet and discuss, among other options, a no-fly zone, but I'm told that is a very remote possibility, difficult to implement. The UN will likely vote next week to suspend Libya from the Human Rights Council and could launch investigations that could eventually go to the International Criminal Court. The Europeans have already voted to take steps toward tougher sanctions and an arms embargo, and President Obama can take similar steps by executive order. But will any of this impress Gaddafi, who is described by experts, and you've heard Richard Engel, as both confrontational and delusional? So officials say it is possible that none of these steps will prevent the regime from retrenching and responding more violently.
All right, Andrea Mitchell in D.C. tonight. Andrea, thanks.